is HyperAuto12, and I'm back with another video on YouTube. One big update I would like to bring to you guys is that I have officially bought Split Second off of Steam and got back to playing the game again. But today, after playing the entire game and getting first place on every single one, I would like to do a tier list review of every single car that I remember driving back in that time. So, without further ado, let's get started. This is the most accurate tier list I found. I noticed that there are only a couple cars missing, and I'll get to those in the end. So, we'll just take care of these cars first, and then I'll mention those that were missing. I did add the DLC section since that is like a separate group of cars that you probably need to buy or something, which I do not have. So I am unable to review these. However, a few of these are basically cars that you unlock in online or quick play, to where like you have to press a certain amount of buttons to unlock it. These are only playable on the extra, not the campaign, such as this Ryback Coyote, the Cyclone, the FX350, and the Ryback Mohawk. So all of those are pretty much slow cars, like starter related cars, kind of like the 455, the Brawler, and stuff like that. So I'm not going to review those either. Without further ado, let's get started. So first off, we have one of the three starter cars, the Cobretti 455 GT. Out of those three, I think that is probably the best starter car of the three. Honestly, the acceleration already hits the spot, and it has very stable cornering, and I think the proportion of the speed and the handling with the acceleration of that car just makes it overall outstanding. So this already gets a really good position in the tier, and I believe it goes to A. Next up, we have the Cobretti 530 GTS, one of the very first cars that has a speed of 7 out of 10 bars already, which is already mind-blowing. And this is actually my favorite car in the game. I think the proportion of the acceleration, speed, and cornering, as well as how it drifts, the grip on the car, just overall amazes me. This is the car that I have won most of the harder elite races in as well. So I pretty much don't have as much explanation needed, since this is the main car that I run away from the enemy boss the most. Without question, this car, purely S tier. Absolutely S tier. Next up, Cobretti Cascade. This was originally my childhood champion when I originally played it back on the PS3. It's one of the best all-around cars, in my opinion. It's got 5 out of 10 bars for speed, so half. Acceleration is definitely really good for a middle-class car as well. It's got pretty stable drift on this car, so I do think this car definitely handles really well. I really enjoy driving this one when it comes to playing the big rig boom events. Very stable, easy to dodge the canisters, and sometimes my car even wrestles with the trucks, which is not okay to me, but overall overtakes them quite well. This car actually did most of the big rig booms with, so this, I believe, is another car that deserves to be S tier. Next up, the Cobretti GT500. Now, no offense, this is one of the cars that has the highest level of drifting, just like the Cascade and a few others, but how it drifts is a bit too wide, and this car is one of the much lagged out kind of cars, in my opinion. What I mean by that is that it probably shouldn't be unlocked that late. Main reason is because its speed is sluggish for where it's standing. Um, its drifting is way too wide. It is quite slippery, and it's quite easy to crash this car, so I never really enjoyed driving this one, and honestly, no offense, I think it's one of the worst cars I've ever driven, so F tier. Cobretti GT RS. This Porsche-based car, I think, is one of the first marvels for the elite races after driving the 455 GT. This is one of the earlier cars to unlock, and it already has really decent speed for where it stands, and the acceleration. It's not too slippery either. Uh, Drifting is quite controllable on this car. So overall, this one really helped me on the first half of the elite races. So this car, I would say it goes to A tier. Next up, the Cobretti Iridium. This is the very first car to unlock after the 3 beginner cars. I think this is a pretty average, decent car. Definitely able to overtake the beginner bots just like the 455 GT. And acceleration is not as good. Handling is still okay. This is a complete average car that I don't mind driving, but I don't think it is able to win as much. So for the Cobretti Iridium, I have that put onto C tier. C tier is basically the basic average car. Cobretti Nero GT400. Now this is pretty much a good standing like the Cobretti GT RS. You pretty much unlock it, if I remember, right after this car. Speed is pretty much the same. It's got better cornering drift, but acceleration is just a bit sluggish. Overall, it still has really good control on the steering. It's just the acceleration doesn't make it as much to a par as the Cobretti GT RS. So, for the Cobretti Nero GT400, I have it put as B tier. Next up, the Cobretti Pursuit. This is one of the later cars to unlock as well, after the Cobretti 530 GTS. It's got 6 bars for speed, 6 bars for acceleration. Drifting is also one of the highest, but just like the GT500, I feel like the steering, cornering, and drifting is a bit more wide, but honestly, it still has a lot more control than the GT500, and the fact that it's got way more speed and better acceleration, I think it still is a really good car to drive. So, Cobretti Pursuit. I actually did win quite a decent amount of races in the Cobretti Pursuit as well, surprisingly. So I still think it's a really good car to drive. I just don't find it as good as the Cascade or the 530 GTS due to it being a bit less sharp on the cornering and driving, but not as bad as the GT500. So I believe the Cobretti Pursuit deserves to be at least in the A tier. Next up, Cobretti Slipstream. This is another one of my favorite cars ever. One of the biggest disclaimers on the Cobretti Slipstream is that it is quite slippery. It's easy to drift on this car, literally losing grip when turning. But I do believe it has one of the best handling drifts out of every single car. It still maintains a really good speed whenever it makes a wide corner, and it's very easy to recover from a drift on this car as well, even though it's slippery when it comes to starting a drift. This baby, 8 bars of acceleration, even though only 4 bars of speed. I would say acceleration is one of the biggest aspects, one of the biggest and most important aspects in a car. So, Cobretti Slipstream. This car, I believe, is a huge warrior. Part of the garbage trucks, it is trash day today. This car is an absolute warrior when it comes to fighting the helicopters. Pretty much, I win every single one with this car. and this is a huge competitor in elite races as well as against the higher end cars like the 530 GTS, the Cyclone, and the FX350. This car, 100% S tier. Cobretti Vortex. This is the beginning of the faster cars, and it's got really decent acceleration as well. But what I don't like about this car is that this car is actually very slippery. Unlike the Slipstream, it's really hard to control the drift, like recover from the drift, especially when driving this car. And I feel like this car, the fact that it's too slippery, it always goes a bit too slow on the cornering. And I tried to race this in some of the earlier elite races. It just keeps on failing to finish first because of how slippery it is. And because of how slippery it is, it's also pretty easy to crash, but not as bad as the Cobretti GT500. So, for the Cobretti Vortex, I am putting it in D tier. Next up, we have the Ryback Bandit, the second truck to unlock in this game. Well, actually, no, sorry. The second truck in the game, but the first truck to unlock, since the Tornado is the very first truck, but is one of the beginners. This is actually, in my opinion, better than the Ryback Tornado, but unlike the other cars that unlock at a similar time as the Bandit, it's a bit sluggish, but it controls pretty well for a truck. Still a bit drifty sometimes, but overall maintains a pretty good ratio. It's mainly the acceleration that kind of pulls it off. So for the Ryback Bandit, because of how sluggish it is, it's going in D tier. Sorry. I hope the microphone's not catching the garbage truck noise that much, but we'll keep on going. Next up is the Ryback Brawler, one of the first 3 beginner cars again. And it's easy to see that it's based on the Chevrolet Camaro. This car, I say, is the slowest of all the cars in the game. It's only got 1 bar of speed, 1 bar of acceleration. Its biggest advantage is drifting, but I still don't think drifting is as good as some of the cars in the higher tiers, especially the Cascade and Pursuit. So, because of how slow this car is, and the fact that it still doesn't corner as well, even though it says it's got pretty high drift, strength is okay, but overall this car is still going in F tier. Next up, we have the Ryback Coyote. This is another car that's similar to the Cascade and the Pursuit. I say it's more similar to the Cascade based on the durability of the steering and drifting. But this car, kind of like the Pursuit, it doesn't corner as good as the Cascade and some other all-round cars. So it's a bit slower than the it's a bit slower than the Pursuit. It maintains grip when cornering very well, and it's good at judging when to drift, but it's just cornering in general is still a bit too wide. So the Ryback Coyote, I say, is a pretty average car, just like the Cobretti Iridium, so it goes into C tier. Ryback Cyclone RS. This is the fastest out of the 3 higher end supercars, like the Cobretti 530 GTS and the Hanzo FX350. But what I don't like about this one, compared to the other 2, is that the grip is terrible. It's very easy to drift on this car, and it drifts quite wide, but it's really hard to recover from the drifting as well. And because of that, it's really easy for me to crash this car after losing grip. So overall, I think this car is probably the worst of the big 3. And because of that, this car is going into D tier. Ryback Firestorm, the ultimate car to unlock in the game. I say it's a bit too late. I felt like the Firestorm probably should have been unlocked a bit earlier than the FX350 and the 530 GTS. Speed is not as good. Acceleration is the same. But drifting is actually quite phenomenal, but in my opinion, it's not as good as the Cobretti Slipstream. Its drifting is still really good, able to gain as much power play bars as the Cobretti Slipstream, but it's a bit harder to recover from the drift than the Slipstream. So that makes it a bit easier to crash. It drifts is slightly sharper, but of course the Cobretti Slipstream still controls the drift a little bit better than Firestorm. So I don't think the Firestorm is as top-notch as the Slipstream and the 530 GTS. So the Firestorm is still a really good car, but it won't be well fit for S tier that good enough. It's going to be an A tier. Next car, we have the Ryback Mohawk. This is another one of those earlier unlocking vehicles, and I didn't really have as much interest in this car much. Cornering is not as good, drifting is okay, speed is pretty good for when it unlocks, but overall the performance of it is not too much on par. It's a bit more on the slower end, so the Ryback Mohawk is not the worst. I am going to put it in D tier. Next car, we have the monster truck, the first monster truck to unlock, the Ryback Thunder. This is actually really good standing. I honestly like this monster truck a lot back when it's back in the period of it being unlocked. It controls pretty well on the cornering. It slows down and turns sharp. Drifting might not be as phenomenal, acceleration is sluggish, but it's got really good speed. It is quite durable for its kind as well when it comes to dodging the power planes and stuff like that. So I think the Ryback Thunder is a pretty good starting foundation of the better monster trucks. Definitely a great starter car for the monster trucks. So, this Ryback Thunder deserves its position in B tier. Next up, we have the Ryback Titan. When I compared that with the Ryback Thunder, it doesn't really make much of a difference. It just has slightly better acceleration and just 1 bar better of speed. But I feel like it's just not, when it comes to the time of unlocking it, you have to unlock it, I believe, after the Cobretti Pursuit, which makes it a bit late. I don't think it should be unlocked after the 530 and the Pursuit, since they're much faster than the Titan. So I'm kind of disappointed with the Titan, but at the same time, it's still a bit better than Ryback Thunder. I still give it a position in B tier. Next up, we have the Ryback Tornado, the last of the 3 starter cars, and the slowest truck of all time. Acceleration is just as bad as the Ryback Brawler, but speed is better than the Brawler and the Cobretti 455 GT. But it still doesn't really pique my interest much at all. I still believe, based on the acceleration, cornering is not that good either. This car still is going to join the Ryback Brawler and the Cobretti GT500 in F tier. Okay. So this Elite 440 Special is actually the special one to just unlock by pressing random keys in like the quick place setup. So just like these 4. But as you can see, the regular Elite 440 Special is missing in this list. So I'm gonna use this and have that assumed to be the regular 440 Special. This is actually a pretty powerful all-around car. It's got 6 bars of speed, 7 bars of drift and strength, and 6 bars of acceleration. So this is actually pretty decent. Another good founding father of the higher end cars. But I just think the size is a bit too big for that car. When I played it in some events, I didn't feel like it didn't feel as quick as the Cobretti Pursuit, especially. So when it comes to facing the enemy Bosso and Elite, Braun and the Hammer are actually quite some typical opponents. They really want to tear you down. So the Elite 440 Special is still a really decent car, and probably, I would say, in the middle of the Elite squad. So for this car, I'm going to put it in B tier. Next up, we have the Elite Goliath. This, honestly, I think is my favorite monster truck of the three. Well, technically it's not a truck, it's more of an SUV. It's the fastest of the three. It's got 9 bars of speed. And if I remember, I think the acceleration is just a bit more sluggish than the Titan, but it's got brutal strength, just like both of these monster trucks. Because of the higher speed, and it pretty much goes on par, just slightly better than the other two monster trucks. B tier. Elite GT12. This, honestly, I don't know what to say about this other than probably shouldn't be the last Elite car to unlock. I mean, yeah, it makes sense. It's got the fastest speed out of all of them, the best acceleration out of all of them, decent drift, but this car is very weak in terms of strength. But when I even drove it on some of the Elite races, cornering was okay. It maintains a pretty good grip when it comes to cornering, as in like it doesn't slip to where it drifts most of the time when it comes to cornering. But when you're driving zigzag, that's when you lose control and end up drifting into a wall and crash. This is the weakest car out of all of them in terms of strength. It's very easy to crash this car, and whenever I drive this car, it's very hard to keep up with, especially Vixen and Raptor. So even though it says in the stats that it's got maximum speed and maximum acceleration, like the highest speed, highest acceleration, I just don't think the overall performance is as good at all. So I think this is one of the biggest disappointments in terms of timing of unlock and just steering in general. This car is probably the worst out of the 4. I'm putting it in C tier. It's definitely better than the ones that are lower than it. So, especially the Cyclone and the Vortex. I can agree with that. Next up, Elite S510. This is the first car to unlock out of all the Elite cars. And I gotta say, it's absolutely my favorite. Yes, the speed might be sluggish, just like the Cobretti Slipstream, but the acceleration is almost as good. What I really like about this car is that it actually corners really well. The timing of drift for each corner, spot on. I absolutely love it. This Elite S510 also had me win quite a number of races in the upper half of the series. At least in the middle part of the lower part of the second half. And the acceleration and the cornering and the type of drift it's got, that definitely makes it a true winner. And I could definitely tell why Vixen and Raptor always wins compared to all the other Elite cars. So this Elite S510, S tier. Absolutely. Hanzo Bayonet R. This is almost as bad as the Cobretti Vortex, but I do believe that the drifting is just a bit better. It's a bit easier to recover from a drift on this car than the Cobretti Vortex, but there isn't any other difference at all. Drifting and strength might be a bit different, but overall I think how this car handles drifting is just slightly better than the Vortex, but not as good as the Slipstream and the S510. But this car is more towards being related to the Vortex, so it's still gonna be in a bit lower end than the others that I mentioned. So what I put for this Hanzo Bayonet R, I'm putting it in C tier. It's still really good average car. But another thing that really kind of gets me about the Hanzo Bayonet R is that whenever I drive the Hanzo Bayonet R, I'm already starting to race against much faster cars, starting with the Cobretti Slipstream and sometimes the 530 GTS and the Ryback Cyclone RS, which also makes this car really difficult to win. That's another reason why I have it in C tier. Alright, last but not least on this list, we have the Hanzo FX350. this is another big champion, and I do find it reasonable to have that being one of the last cars to unlock in the game as well. Speed is exactly the same as the Cobretti 530 GTS. Acceleration is as good as the Cobretti Slipstream. But what makes this car unique from the other two is it's got more grip. It's easy to corner without losing grip and drift. And whenever you drift in this car, it drifts very sharp, so you have to make sure you drift for such a short time and recover from it immediately after. But I do believe this car has a little bit of a weakness than the Cobretti 530 GTS, and that is whenever it comes to power play and you get hit by it, it's very hard to control the car to it's very hard to get enough time to control the car before actually crashing into a wall or a barrier. This car, that is the main weakness. But the biggest thing I can give kudos to is that this car, because it has really good control when cornering and steering, it's able to dodge cans really well in the big rig boom. That's I definitely like about that. So this Hanzo FX350 I still believe is a big champion. Even though not as good as the 530 GTS or the Slipstream, I'm still putting it in S tier. So this is all the cars that were available on this tier list. I noticed there were at least 2 cars that were not included in this list. First one I want to mention is the Hanzo Indus V8R. The Hanzo Indus V8R is the second car to unlock in the game, and honestly, just like the 455 GT, its acceleration is phenomenal. It's actually slightly better than the 455 GT. Though it is a bit easier to lose grip when cornering than the 455 GT, but overall it's still amazing. I definitely enjoy driving that in the much earlier times before I unlocked the Cobretti GT RS. So for the Hanzo Indus V8R, I still would like to put that in A tier. Next up, we have the Hanzo GT. I believe the Hanzo GT is one of the most anticipated cars to unlock of all time. It's the first car to have 5 bars of speed. Drifting, I think, is one of the best. It's got the best radius of drifting in every single corner that I've ever experienced. It's a bit sluggish on the acceleration, but it still competes really well with the middle end cars. That one I think takes the next step, unlike the Cobretti Vortex. So, Hanzo GT, that initially is one of my other huge favorites in the game before unlocking the higher end cars, starting with the Slipstream and the S510. So Hanzo GT, I'm just like the Indus V8R, I'm also putting it in A tier. Now, before I conclude, let me check the list one more time if I'm missing anything. And that's pretty much it. Well, just quick disclaimer, this is based on my opinion, this is based on my experience of driving, but I hope you guys find this list helpful in identifying which car you like the best. If there's a car that you disagree with, let me know in the comments below, but overall, this is my list of split-second cars. So, hope you find this helpful. I definitely think the 530 GTS, the Cascade, and the Slipstream are my top 3 favorites, followed by the S510 and the FX350. And those cars I definitely love to drive in competitions. So, I hope you liked this video. If you do, drop a like, subscribe for more. Other than that, I'll see you next time.